turn you over to Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. Thanks so much for watching.
Happening now, breaking news, surging fires. Wind-whipped infernos blast their way across Southern California, with one burning all the way to the sea. The flames destroying dozens of homes, shutting down highways and rail lines. Can fire crews stop the disaster from spreading? Undisclosed emails, newly revealed communications raise new questions on what was discussed during Donald Trump Jr.'s controversial meeting with a group of Russians at Trump Tower, and the follow-up with the Trump campaign. It's a CNN exclusive. On speaking terms, Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi meet with President Trump and their Republican counterparts a week after canceling over one of the president's tweets. Just moments ago, the House passed a bill to avoid a government shutdown for 2 weeks. What about after that? And Franken's final shot. Senator Al Franken bows to overwhelming pressure from fellow Democrats and announces he's stepping down amid allegations of sexual harassment. What were his scathing remarks about President Trump and Roy Moore? I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We're following breaking news, including the multiple wildfires burning out of control in Southern California. They've now charred more than 116,000 acres and destroyed dozens of homes and other buildings. The largest fire has shut down a major highway and rail line in Ventura County. And now we're getting word of a new fire that's just broken out in northern San Diego County. Also, a CNN exclusive. The first indication of follow-up to Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting over at Trump Tower in New York City last summer with a group of Russians, including a lawyer with ties to the Kremlin. Sources are telling CNN that the British publicist who arranged the meeting later sent multiple emails to one Russian participant and a member of President Trump's inner circle, shedding new light on what was discussed. And shortly after President Trump has finished a White House meeting with Democratic and Republican leaders, the House passed a stopgap spending bill to avoid a government shutdown for 2 weeks. We're covering all of that, much more this hour, with our guests, including Congressman Jim Himes of the House Intelligence Committee. And our correspondents and specialists are also standing by. But let's begin with the fire disaster unfolding in Southern California right now. CNN's Paul Verkaman is working the story for us. Paul, the largest blaze, the so-called Thomas Fire, is now threatening communities close to where you are in Santa Barbara.
That's right. I'm right on the Ventura-Santa Barbara County line. Look over my left shoulder. This is the leading and northwest advance of the fire. You can see the flames on the hillside, but the firefighters had been able to corral this right here and make a stand. They were able to get in with some helicopters earlier and make water drops. That was impossible earlier when the winds were just so savage and vicious. Those Santa Anas that blow from inland and toward the coast, as you articulated, Wolf, this fire has burned all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This is part of that. And if you look on a remote hill over here, you can see a group of prisoners who are helping fight this fire. They are cutting what's called fire line. A bulldozer went in there earlier. They're making a stand right here. This is a monster of a fire. It has burned 96,000 acres. That's twice the size of Washington, D.C. It has burned down 151 structures. They expect that number to go up because they have not been able to do damage assessment. Also, they're going to get the military involved. There is a nearby air wing that is made up of National Guard's troops. They flew 8 times yesterday and dropped 18,000 gallons of fire retardant. This is a tough story for them. Some of those members of the National Guard have lost their homes. Others have been evacuated, and yet they fight on. We hope to see these C-130 tankers that have been retrofitted to fight fires fly today. They can use all the help they can get. And if those can get up and drop retardant, that will make for even a rosier picture. As gloomy as this looks, Wilf, and I know people have been questioning if somebody has doctored pictures with sepia tones or tried to change any of this. This is actually rosy, as I said, because they're making progress and they're making a stand right here on the Santa Barbara County, Ventura County line.
Paul Verkaman for us on the scene. Thanks, Paul. Let's go down the coast a bit to the other side of the fire. CNN Sarah Seidner's in Ventura County for us. Sarah, we now have, almost 100,000 acres of burned land out there and dozens of homes destroyed.
200,000 people evacuated from their homes as well. We are at one of the homes in the evacuation zone, and we are watching as the blaze is burning closer and closer, coming down that hill. We're also watching the incredible work of the fire crews, and they are continuing every couple of minutes, sending 2 helicopters back and forth, picking up water and dumping them right there on those blazes. But every time they get one part of the blaze out, another one pops up. I should also mention that in the Ojai Valley, there are 5 assisted living facilities that had to be evacuated. At one point, the Ojai Hospital was told to shelter in place. This is still an extremely dangerous fire. We are also getting just rained on by ash that's coming down from the mountains there. And this is an area here where we are on a farm. There is a lot of farmland around here, a lot of avocado trees that stand in the way between the fire, where it is going, and it is heading, the big fear, towards Santa Barbara. That's what firefighters are telling us throughout the day, that their biggest worry is trying to kind of get in front of it so that they can try to stop it from getting to more populated areas. But this is an extremely dangerous fire hazard. The good news is that in this area for right now, the winds have not picked up as high right at this hour as they were supposed to. We're talking 80-mile-an-hour gusts, but they are starting to pick up again, and there is a lot of fear here. Everyone here says, look, we realize we are not out of the woods yet. Wolf?
Certainly not yet. Let's hope they will be soon, though. Sarah, thank you very much. There's other breaking news we're following, including new details emerging right now about what happened after Donald Trump Jr.'s very controversial meeting with a group of Russians at Trump Tower in New York City during the presidential campaign. Our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, is working this story for us. And, Jim, you're getting some exclusive new information from your sources.
That's right, along with my colleagues Manu Raju and Jeremy Herb. Since this Trump Tower meeting in June 2016 was revealed, Trump World has had essentially 2 positions about it. One, that the meeting was a one-off, there was no follow-up, and 2, that the discussion in that meeting was purely or largely about Russian adoptions, U.S. adoptions of Russian children. These newly disclosed emails, which we're learning about for the first time and congressional investigators now have, raise questions about both of those positions. One, clearly these emails show that there was some follow-up to that meeting by some of the participants of that meeting. I'm going to give you an example of one. On June 14th, 2016, this is 5 days after that meeting in Trump Tower between senior members of the Trump campaign and Russians who were promising in advance of that meeting damaging information on Hillary Clinton, that 5 days after that meeting, the person who helped broker that meeting, Rob Goldstein, a British publicist, emailed a Russian who was inside that meeting, another Russian who helped arrange it, on the day that news broke that Russia had hacked the DNC emails. He emailed them and said, "Isn't this eerily weird," in the words of this email, "isn't this eerily weird in light of what we talked about in that meeting then?" Now, Wolf, it's possible there's an innocent explanation of that. In fact, we've spoken to people involved who said that they were saying, this email was saying it's eerily weird because we had not discussed the DNC or Russia hacking the DNC, but at least one shows that there was follow-up, and 2 raises questions of what exactly was raised during those discussions in that Trump Tower meeting. And
Jim, you've also learned of a different email suggesting that Donald Trump was perhaps going to open up a social media account on some Russian media site.
That's right. Rob Goldstein, again, he's the British publicist who set up this meeting between Don Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, and these Russians who, again, were, when they were coming into this meeting, promising damaging information on Hillary Clinton. Well, following this meeting, Rob Goldstein emailed Dan Scavino, who was at the time with the Trump campaign and is now the social media director for the Trump administration, emailed him, pressing him, suggesting that Donald Trump Sr., the candidate, open up a page on VK. That's basically the Russian equivalent of Facebook. Very popular. Millions of Russians use it. And he repeatedly presented this idea and suggested this idea to the Trump campaign. We have been told that that idea was first discussed as they were coming out of this meeting in Trump Tower on June 2016. So again, it raises the question, what more was discussed when you had these senior members of the Trump campaign sitting down with Russians who were promising this damaging information on Hillary Clinton? I should note that CNN searched VK, our Moscow bureau. They did not find any evidence that Donald Trump set up a page as discussed here. Just at a minimum, it describes, though, another topic of conversation around the time of that Trump Tower meeting. An intriguing development. You've also learned about the reaction when Donald Trump Jr. released those private emails he had received that arranged that that meeting over at Trump Tower in New York. The emails in which Donald Trump Jr. Seems very eager to get what was described as dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russians. Well, you remember, after this meeting was revealed, and again, the first story explaining what happened at this Trump Tower meeting has since been proven not to be entirely accurate. After this meeting, Donald Trump Jr. released a series of emails showing what was discussed in advance. And those emails showed that the Russians, when they came into this meeting, were offering at least the possibility of damaging information on Hillary Clinton. When Donald Trump Jr. released all those emails explaining what the real reason for the meeting was, at least in advance, one of the participants in that meeting, Ike Kavalzadeh, his son, emailed him with the phrasing wolf in this email, again an email that congressional investigators have, emailed his father saying, why would Donald Trump Jr. Show himself to be colluding with the Russians? He used that word, colluding. Now, to be clear, it's not clear if in this email the son of this Russian participant in the meeting was just joking about it. And again, it's just an observation between the two. But it shows you the number of communications that followed this meeting and referenced back to this key meeting in Trump Tower between many of the participants in those conversations. I'm sure the special counsel Robert Mueller has all this information, plus a whole lot more. Thanks very much. Thank you. Great reporting, Jim Sciutto and his team. Also breaking right now, the U.S. House of Representatives just passed a bill to keep the government open for 2 more weeks. The Senate still needs to approve the bill. The House vote came moments ago after President Trump met with Democratic and Republican congressional leaders over at the White House looking for a long-term agreement. Let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. He's got the very latest for us. What are you learning, Jim?
Well, that will come as a relief to the White House, Wolf, but the White House is continuing to dodge the issue of sexual harassment. On the day that Senator Al Franken announced he is stepping down, the president and his aides evaded answering how the White House should lead on this subject. As you said, Wolf, for now, though, the government at least has avoided a shutdown after passing a spending bill in the House in the last few minutes.
Senator Franken.
In response to growing calls for his resignation from his Democratic colleagues, embattled Minnesota Senator Al Franken acknowledged the allegations of groping leveled against him, and while he didn't apologize, he did say he is stepping down.
Today I am announcing that in the coming weeks I will be resigning as a member of the United States Senate.
But there was a parting shot at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, where President Trump continues to face lingering accusations of sexual misconduct and still endorses alleged child molester Republican Roy Moore in the Alabama Senate race.
I, of all people, am aware that there is some irony in the fact that I am leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party. But this decision is not about me. It's about the people of Minnesota.
Asked about that, the president had almost no response.
Mr. President, any comment on Senator Al Franken? He made some comments about you earlier today, sir. I didn't hear it, sir.
While the White House pointed to the voters who elected Mr. Trump.
The president addressed the comments back during the campaign. We feel strongly that the people of this country also addressed that when they elected Donald Trump to be president, and I've addressed it several times from here and don't have anything new to add.
Press Secretary Sarah Sanders all but said there's no issue in the Oval Office.
Certainly, as a woman myself, I've never felt anything but treated with the highest level of respect and been empowered to do my job, and I think that's what I've seen the president do day in and day out since we've been here and during the campaign, and so I think that's a pretty good start and a pretty good example on that front.
That overlooks Mr. Trump's comments caught on tape by Access Hollywood.
Just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just kiss them. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it.
Not to mention the candidate's response to women who had accused him of assault.
Take a look. You take a look
Look at her words. You tell me what you think. I don't think so.
The president appeared to be more focused on avoiding a government shutdown that could happen this month.
We're all here as a very friendly, well-unified group.
Mr. Trump welcomed Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi to the Oval Office after they passed on a meeting with the president to keep the government running a week ago.
We hope we can come to an agreement.
But Pelosi warned Democrats are willing to hold their ground if Congress fails to find a solution for the young undocumented known as the Dreamers.
No, I stand by that statement. We will not leave here without a DACA fix.
The White House did try to resolve one issue.
God bless the United States.
Explaining the president was suffering from a case of dry mouth during a speech at the White House a day ago.
Frankly, pretty ridiculous questions. The president's throat was dry, nothing more than that.
Now, as for White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders labeling questions about Mr. Trump's health as ridiculous, it should be noted inquiries about a president's health have come with the territory of serving in the Oval Office for decades. And don't forget, during the campaign, Mr. Trump repeatedly questioned Hillary Clinton's stamina to serve as president. On another front, Wolf, we should also point out the White House is responding to Congressman and civil rights icon John Lewis, who is skipping the opening of a civil rights museum in Mississippi this weekend. That is a snub to the president, and the White House says it is disappointed. Wolf.
Jim Acosta at the White House with all the late-breaking developments. Thank you very much. Let's get some more on all of this. Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut is joining us. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Wolf.
Let me get your reaction to these late-breaking developments in the Russia probe. You heard Jim Sciutto's report. Do these new revelations raise new questions about Donald Trump Jr.'s earlier insistence that there was no follow-up to that controversial 2016 Trump Tower meeting in New York City?
Yeah, Wolf, I want to be a little careful about this. That's not clear from what happened yesterday, and I do want to be a little careful about discussing the particulars of what happened behind closed-door depositions. But I can make a broader statement, which is we know publicly over time, and I and fellow investigators know privately from material that we have seen, that there was an awful lot of outreach on the part of people that we know about, like Papadopoulos, like Donald Trump Jr., who showed interest in getting material, and then an awful lot of outreach from people on the outside saying, hey, we may have something for you, including, of course, Rob Goldstone. So there's a lot more there. The big question, of course, Wolf, is whether anything was conveyed and used by the campaign. People have different definitions of collusion, but we're still working, and this is why this investigation must continue, because there's a lot of leads to follow, including the one that you referred to, that will get to the question of whether damaging information was actually conveyed to the campaign, a question we don't yet know the answer to.
Rob Goldstone, the British PR guy, is set to meet with the Intelligence Committee, as early as next week. What questions will you have for him?
Well, he, of course, was at the center of the Don Jr. meeting. He was the one who arranged it, and we will go into that meeting open-minded. I think he was accurately described as a colorful character, so it could be anything from just trying to raise his profile with a presidential campaign to actually having some real stuff. But his name does pop up a lot, and so we have questions beyond the Don Jr. Meeting for Mr. Goldstone to really get behind whether this was all just him showboating or whether, in fact, he was in contact with any Russians, and of course there is a connection with Mr. Galarov, and whether that was part of a concerted effort to get to the Trump campaign and to provide them with compromising information.
Was Donald Trump Jr. forthcoming during the 7 or 8 hours of testimony yesterday before your committee?
I would describe him as largely cooperative. You heard Ranking Member Adam Schiff yesterday raise one point that was troubling, which was that he did have a conversation that would appear to be on topic here with his father, the president, and claimed that because he had his lawyer in the room and that the president, his father, had a lawyer in the room, he claimed attorney-client privilege for not answering questions about the nature of that conversation. Now, I didn't go to law school, but I'm pretty sure, as are most people, that there is no attorney-client privilege for conversations that happen between two people who are not attorneys. So we are obviously very interested in following up that because, the fact that he doesn't want to talk about it, the fact that it happened very close, of course, to this whole issue around that meeting and how to respond to it is central to the investigation.
All right, we'll see if you get answers from him on that specific question down the road. Stand by, Congressman. There are more development in Connecticut, a key member of the House Intelligence Committee. Christopher Wray, the new director congressman. He was testifying up on Capitol Hill, and he was asked to respond to the recent attacks to the FBI by President Trump, who described the agency in one tweet as being in tatters. Was Director Wray forceful enough in his defense of the agency?
Well, I didn't see the whole testimony, Wolf, but what little I did see of it, I thought exactly the opposite. You know, the president's statement about the FBI, these are highly trained men and women who put their lives on the line very literally to keep us safe from terrorism, from crime, from all sorts of things. The president does a lot of irresponsible things. To call what they do and to call their organization in tatters was beyond outrageous. You know, adjectives fail when you talk about the irresponsibility of this president to people who, again, risk their lives for us. So I was looking for a slightly more full-throated defense of the men and women of the FBI, but the director chose to do what he did.
Let me get your quick reaction to Senator Al Franken's announcement today that he plans to resign from his seat in the coming weeks amid more allegations of sexual harassment. This comes during the same week that Democratic Congressman John Conyers has stepped down from his seat. Do you think this is a sincere effort by Democrats to address sexual harassment, or is it just also politically expedient?
I'm glad you asked the question that way because, of course, I can't help but observe that Democrats have dealt and been very honest and open and tough with their own. You saw senators across the board on the Democratic side call for Al Franken's resignation yesterday. You saw that happen with John Conyers. And the question, of course, for a lot of women out there ought to be, why are we not hearing any real Republicans do the same with respect to their Senate candidate in Alabama, who is accused of things far worse than Al Franken is, and of course with the president. Why is nobody calling for him to be held accountable by Republicans for behavior that he admitted to? So I'm glad you framed the question. But look, I would say this is an interesting moment here because a lot of us are very glad that this is finally coming to the surface to be dealt with. And we're very glad that women are beginning to feel comfortable coming forward and that men are being held accountable. We're also conscious of the fact that we need to make sure that as we change for the better, as we are, that we also remember that we will have cases of false accusations, that we need to make sure that in our enthusiasm to make sure that women's rights are observed and that men don't engage in piggish behavior, that we also leave room for careful consideration for time to pass so that we can ultimately react to the truth, not to sensationalism.
The Democratic governor of Minnesota, you know, will appoint a Democrat to take Senator Franken's seat. Do you think Democrats would have forced Franken to resign as quickly as they did if the governor of Minnesota, let's say, were a Republican and a Republican would fill that seat?
I don't know, this is one of those moments where I'm actually kind of glad to be over here on the House side. I don't want to duck the question, but that obviously would have made the politics more complicated. But let me say this. I've watched the way the Democratic Party and Democratic leaders have dealt with these issues, with Nancy Pelosi calling on two members of the House of Representatives to resign, on senators yesterday, men and women calling on Al Franken to resign. Those are statements of principles. They are statements of agreement with where this country is finally going. And again, why have we heard nothing equivalent from Republicans in the Senate or in the House with respect to Roy Moore or with respect to the President of the United States?
Congressman Jim Himes, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Coming up, a new mystery sparked by North Korea. They're called ghost ships, and they sometimes carry both living passengers and dead bodies. Are they a sign of increasingly dire conditions?